Hey everybody, it's me, Scott, the creator over here at Heroic Studios Gaming. How's it going today? Today I'm going to jump right in. I'm kind of behind schedule, so this is coming up today, and then it's going to get posted up later tonight. So it'll get launched later tonight, and you'll see it probably tomorrow. Because I've been busy. I had Rose City Comic Con, and I had some other stuff going on, so I unfortunately couldn't do it any earlier. But anyway, let's talk about today. Today's my book corner. I'm going to be talking about DC Vertigo Comics, aka DC Vertigo Comics, issue of The Losers, the comic series. It's actually a completed comic series. It's 32 issues. They came out between 2003 and 2006, and it was a planned miniseries created by Andy Diggle, the writer, and the at the time the editor of Vertigo Comics, Will Dennis. So they planned this miniseries and they wrote it, and it was a revamp of an old DC comic series called The Losers, which was written by Jack Kirby, mostly known for his Marvel fame, but it was made by Jack Kirby or drawn by Jack Kirby. I'm not sure which it was, but anyway, Jack Kirby it was his deal for DC, and it was a revamp of that story. It was a spiritual sequel, as it were, and they did that by linking one of the main characters of The Losers, the original, and the current Losers that I'm talking about today, in the fact that the main character is Lieutenant Colonel Clay, who's the grandson of Colonel Clay from the original. So that's how they did it together. So this is actually this sort of revamped spiritual sequel to an older series. Vertigo Comics, you may or may not know, was a version of, it no longer exists, was a version of DC Comics that allowed for sort of more contemporary adult themes, based on, like, instead of superheroes and stuff, but things like that the creators wanted to do. And the creators, this allowed for creator ownership of the comics. That's what this sub-company did. And so they could write whatever sort of ultra-violent, profanity-filled, sort of nudity kind of thing that they wanted. And it worked because Vertigo Comics is most well known for releasing the comics Sandman, which I'm sure you know, Hellblazer, Preacher, Fable, and DMZ. Note that all of those I listed were Eisner Award-winning comic books. So, I mean, like, we're talking good stuff here. So, like, it was actually like a good idea by DC to allow this company, and they did their job, and it was great. They also were the ones who relaunched, not originally launched, but relaunched Transmetropolitan, because DC had stopped running it because they didn't want their image, they didn't want Transmetropolitan to be like part of the DC image, so they stopped. But when they created Vertigo, they could put it back out there, and people were buying it like crazy. So if you have a copy of Transmetropolitan, there's like a 50-50 chance it says DC on it, but it's probably more likely that it says Vertigo. But anyway, the writer, Andy Diggle, of this particular series, he's actually most well known as the editor of 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd comics, or Judge Dredd magazine, at Rebellion Publishing from 2000 to 2012. But during that time, he was also a freelance writer for Vertigo, and he wrote this one. He also wrote Batman Confidential, Lady Constantine, and Green Arrow Year One, which is actually what spawned the Green Arrow TV show that you may or may not have seen. So, you know, kind of a big guy, I guess. But yeah, so he and Will Dennis, they just sort of jumped around on ideas, and they finally decided they were going to revamp this sort of World War II story that they had sort of in the archives, as it were, as a contemporary, crimey, thrillery, Afghanistan War on Terror kind of update. I keep saying kind of, it's weird. It's a verbal tick all of a sudden. But the story is that essentially they didn't know what to do, and then they eventually fell on this one, and Andy Diggle didn't actually know anything about it, so he wrote his own story after doing like basic Wikipedia research on what the original was, and he did a good job. The plot is really tight. They planned it as a miniseries, like I said before, and so it's really tight because they only released 32 issues of it, which meant that it only ran for 3 years, and they had already pre-planned that out. So the story, each episode or each issue, is very closely linked to the previous issues and the upcoming issues. So there's like no real questions. You don't have any filler issues or like loose ends that don't get tied up. Everything was planned out in advance. So they had this like cool, 3-year plan for this, following our sort of anti-A-team kind of thing. Yeah, and that's what it is. Its story follows these 5 spec ops guys who were killed in Pakistan by a rogue CIA agent using the code name Max. and that's an OSS codename that no longer exists, we find out in the series. And so he's not supposed to exist, but he does exist, and they saw him, and so he ordered their death. Fortunately for them, they got the kill order, or they overheard the kill order on the radio before it actually happened, so they were not in the chopper that got blown down, and they lived. But they believe that they're on a CIA death list, even though they can't prove it. But they're trying to find a way to to figure out what Max is up to and use the evidence to blackmail the CIA into taking them off the death list so that they can go back to their normal lives. That's the whole point of the story. They're not necessarily trying to stop Max. They're just trying to get enough evidence to make the CIA put them back into normal life. Thus comes in their friend there, the sixth member of their A-team, Aisha, the person with the gun there on the cover. She's actually not one of the losers. She's actually a separate entity. She's a CIA asset, not an operative, a CIA asset. She provides information and help with stuff, and they give her support. So she's actually kind of playing both sides of the fence, which sort of makes them question in the early stages of the comic whether or not she's loyal to them. But eventually, it becomes clear that she has one goal in life, and that is to stop and destroy Max, because her dad used to work for him as in Afghanistan and Pakistan, running drugs and people as a human trafficker and a drug runner and gun runner. And for whatever reason, Max and he did not work out, right? And so her whole life has been terrible. She's like Aisha, I fought Soviets as a kid, right, character. Al-Fadil is her name. And so she's got this his whole backstory about how she was she's had a terrible life, and Max is to blame for it. So while she doesn't necessarily, she's not on a death list, which they use to their advantage from time to time, and she does have some connections to the CIA, which they again use to their advantage from time to time. She's not actually part of their team. She has her own agenda, and they're just aiming in the same direction. So the other character that this comics follows is, just two other characters. There's this field agent, this CIA field agent who has gotten near retirement, and so he's been relegated to desk duty, which he hates. And he's doing his thing. Well, he gets activated by Deputy Director Sanderson, who meets Clay and the team when they're holding Goliath Global Industries port hostage by claiming that they'll blow up a nuke. And so they ask for Max, and Max doesn't show up. In fact, someone else does. It's Deputy Director Sanderson, who talks to them for a little bit before they take off. But when talking to them, they explain that they are after Max, and he's super confused, and he has no idea. And he's also last I heard, you guys were dead. And then they explain what happened, and they explain how Max is behind it. And he, while he doesn't necessarily believe them per se, or so the comic sort of makes you feel, he does actually, because the codename Max is a codename that was used by the CIA at some point in time, but it has been retired, quote unquote. In fact, the field agent that he activates says, "Did we kill Max?" But the reason why Sanderson believes is because about $500 million that was supposed to be headed toward the CIA, thanks to some active things that they did in Iraq right before Operation Desert Storm 2, right, the Persian Gulf War 2. Before that, it came from Saddam Hussein's. Just before that operation, Saddam Hussein's brother withdrew this money from the bank, and the CIA stole it from him. And so it was on its way to the CIA when it suddenly got diverted via some sort of offshore account and became part of someone else's money. And it was being transported by a private military company, who is owned by Goliath Global. So this money that was supposed to go to the CIA was part of this whole thing that Clay was accidentally wrapped up in. And there's a double cross that we find out in the story, which if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But there's a double cross, and the money ends up in the hands of Max instead of the CIA. And so Sanderson knows that this happened, and so he's really suspicious because he has no idea what happened to the money. But he thinks that maybe Clay and his unit, the joke from the movie, are on are on the right track. So he activates this operative who then basically is following them a little bit, but mostly following the trail that they're kind of leaving in their investigation to find out where Max is. So there's another member of the story who's like giving us some insight into the CIA's perspective. But basically this comic book, this graphic novel series is really good because it is like one part a cool story that's like super cool Mission Impossible spy story, but then on the other side it's like the other part. It's like a one part commentary on the U.S. international relations, particularly in regards to the Middle East, and it was written during the War on Terror, roughly at the same time that the U.S. operations in Afghanistan were becoming a little bit more transparent, and we were finding out what we were actually doing there, which wasn't exactly what the public thought. And then also we proceeded with, Operation Desert Storm 2, like going into the Gulf and going into Iraq and finding Saddam Hussein, right? And so this was going on at the same time. So there was kind of a commentary about all of this, and like at the time that I first discovered the comic books, I actually didn't know what was going on in Afghanistan. I had no idea that the U.S. was actually protecting opium fields because the local warlords were protecting U.S. soldiers. So they were protecting us, so we were protecting their assets, which was opium and like illegal heroin, right? And so it's interesting that there's that. Like, I didn't know that. And the story, the commentary about Max sort of leads to this idea that Max is this like really dark, shadowy figure that represents all of the evils that the U.S. is doing. I know about the Iran-Contra affair, which is another thing that comes up. Like, basically, Max was behind the Iran-Contra affair is what they try to say in the comic as well. But essentially, that like I knew the U.S. had some dark dealings. I just didn't know how much of it was. And in this comic, they sort of set that up as like Max is this evil mastermind behind all of this dark stuff that the U.S. government does abroad, right? And they set him up as like this like tangible version of the dark side of America. And then they set up these anti-heroes to sort of be the ones that bring him down, the people we root for. They're gonna bring him down and sort of stop him, right? So it creates this interesting sort of story for somebody who's like learning about it. But like its influence on me is weird. It's not like I wouldn't say that it had a tremendous influence, but like it was one of the first comics or graphic novels rather that I purchased when I became a real boy, right? Like I became like, it was 2008 when I discovered it, and I had just like gotten like I come back from Japan in 2006, and I was like kind of trying to figure out what I was doing. I started school again in 2007, and then in 2008 I was like I had a job. And I had some kind of plans, and I decided to get like a monthly box at the local comic store because I was going in every month to buy comics anyway. Might as well like give myself a discount and like pick them up every month. And I was like I was starting to live what I would consider like a normal adult life. I was 24, like I was finally like being an adult. But I like saw this graphic novel on the shelf, and I picked it up. The first one, it was this one here, Andy Up, that was like 1 through 6. And I just read it, and really, honestly, at the time, I was not aware of the true nuances of like the war on terror and like most of the international relations, and the particulars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I wasn't really aware of all of that. But I saw this as like an anti-A-team kind of thing, and then I think it was cool. I liked it, but I wasn't sure if I was going to buy any more. But then in a couple years later, I went to Korea, and then I came back, and so a couple years later, I was 3 years deep. I had started studying like East Asian studies, and so I was like 3 years deep into my degree, and I was far more aware of what was going on in the Middle East and like the U.S. military operations. And then I heard that there was this movie coming out, and I was like, hey, I think I've heard of this comic. I think I have it. So I went back to the comic shop, and I found that I couldn't find my copy that I had bought like 2 years or 3 years ago. I'm pretty sure I loaned it to a friend, and they never returned it to me. But I couldn't find it, so I went back to the comic shop, and I was like, hey, do you have these things? And he did. He had like the double copy, which I've got right here. And so I got the double copy, which was actually issues like Annie Up and Double Down, which are like 1 and 2. And so I had like, okay, that was way more story, right? And so then I was able to read more story, and I really got into it. I was like, oh man, like now that I understand more of what this is talking about, this is actually hit a lot harder. So I was pretty hooked. And I went and like I have the first 4. I'm missing 5. I don't have the conclusion of the story, but it's on the way. I found that it was on Amazon for cheap, so I went and bought it. But then the movie came out, and so like the movie came out. And while it doesn't delve into like the political discussion that's in the comic book at all, it is still like it's only the first 12 issues of the comic. That's limited to that. It's only the first 12 issues. So they don't solve all of the problems in the movie. But what they do is they take all the best moments of the first 12 issues, and then they found a way to integrate them together and turn it into its own thing, as well as sort of changing up some of the stuff to like be tighter to make it make sense in like a 90-minute movie. Like you're not gonna have like extra characters that we're not gonna see again, right? Like let's not worry about the CIA like Sanderson. Let's not worry about him. Let's not worry about the Death Star. Let's worry about Max and Wade, the two main antagonists, and let's worry about our 6 heroes, anti-heroes, right? And so they did a really good job of making it like mainstream and fit everything together so that somebody could just like sit down, watch it, like it, and move on. But yeah, like all of the best scenes in the movie are also really great scenes in the comic book. Like they did a way of like integrating them into a different, more modernized. They modernized it even more because we weren't really in the War of Terror anymore because it was 2010. So it was like, let's move past all of this and let's move on to like other stuff that is more likely to be the case with the times. So they did that. And so, like, they kept the essence of the story while also making it a creative new medium, which is actually how it influenced me. So the ability to, like, take a story and, like, change it for a different medium and still make it keep the essence of the story is actually pretty freaking cool. And it's really hard to do well. That's why there's a lot of movies that are based off of books or TV shows and movies that are based off of books that don't do a very good job, right? Like, you watch it and you're like, this was not at all what the book is about or even hit on any of the subjects, whereas the Losers movie pretty well hits on the main core ideas of the comic, but still making it like semi-unique so that it's a different experience, but not a bad one. And so that was the thing. That's one of the reasons why I really like the story, not just because I've read the comic, but because it's a good movie in general. And so its influence on me, like this idea of like, you can change mediums and it still works, obviously influenced the ability for me to take a board game and turn it into an RPG, right? Like, as long as you focus on like the core aspects, then you can pull it off. So that was that's it. That's The Losers. I give it 2 thumbs up. Like, honestly, 2 thumbs up for a comic series. If you like graphic novels, if you like reading comics at all, I would do. It's super cheap too. I think that like. So I believe I bought this double issue for $12. I guess I bought it at Barnes and Noble. Yeah, I guess I bought it at Barnes and Noble. But anyway, so I thought I bought it at a comic shop, but it says Barnes and Noble. And then this one was $5, right? That's what I bought that one for. And then this one was $7. And then the one I just bought off of Amazon, I bought it for $6. That's including shipping. So because it didn't have Prime, so it was like $3 plus $3 of shipping. So. I mean, you could get a hold of the whole darn thing for like $20, and you could have the whole story. But it's a really good one, and I wouldn't look past it. But at the very least, watch the movie. It's really cool, and it has some really good actors in it. Some of which later went on to be Captain America. Right. No, but for sure, like 3 of the actors, or four of the actors are actually really well known, and like 2 of them just kind of not. And then one of them, the main bad guy, the guy who plays Max, is actually not like, the movie didn't help his career, but he already had a pretty decent career leading up to the movie. So he's kind of like a B-rated guy who did a lot of soap operas and stuff, and like he's got money from all of these things. He's actually doing okay for himself, I guess. So anyway. That's it for me. I hope that this entertains you, and I hope that you think about potentially reading this story or watching the movie. We might watch the movie together. Who knows? Hit me up. We'll figure it out. All right. Talk to you later.